way up to Masada. Whilst that's that part, down the bottom.
Wow! Pag maglakad, ito ang dadaanan paakyat. Grabe.
And you can actually see some of the adornings on the side here from the time of King Herod. Everything underneath the black line is original.
Wow!
כן, מה שמתחת הוא אמר.
Dali. Oh. Tara na, tara na.
Bakit natin sinundan yun? May isa pa ako dito. I still have another one. Come here, come. I cannot go like this. You wanna drink water? No, no. Yes. Yes. May angin tabi.
I've made it.
Like the other one here.
Herod.
Herod the house. This is the desert.
When you get to the top, just have a breather. Have a rest. Thank you. You don't need to do that. I've got my hat. Thank you very much. Oh, you bought your fan. It's good to have a fan, eh? You've got your own personal fan club.
Be very good na luck.
Okay. You are a great team. You know, the Romans had their legions. You know what Antony calls you? He calls you the legion. Yeah, because you listen, you're well disciplined and absolutely fabulous. Okay, so we've made it onto the mountain. This is a quarry from which they extracted rocks. There are many more quarries on the top of the mountain. We're basically at sea level here. So we're just over 430 meters above sea level. There were several lookout towers. There's one there at the north, there's one in the middle, and there's one at the south. And surrounding the mountain was a double wall. Remember I spoke in Beersheba about the double wall?
Yes.
Okay, and also I mentioned Jericho and Rahab living between the walls. Similar sort of thing here. It was part of a siege defense mentality. So if you built a fortress, no matter where, if you had a double wall system that went round the whole thing, people could live between the walls and they would be looking out all the time just to see what's going on. So that's good. So this is the quarry, one of them, one of the many quarries. Rock-wise, This is dolomitic limestone, the same as the Judean mountains. So it's very good rock. We do not get rain here, and dolomitic limestone is actually porous, which means that water can flow through it, and it would be a big problem to this mountain if that happened, because the sides of the mountain are cracked. So where we're standing, we think that this was probably where the top Roman officer lived after Herod died, and the Romans took charge of all of Herod's territory after his sons did a very bad job. So we call this the commandant's residence. Let's just wander in. We'll wander in and wander through, and you can take pictures. There's a little empty room here.
Commandant's residence.
Somebody must be giving it water. Just have a look in these little rooms. Because below the black line, you can actually see some frescoes. So you would put plaster on the wall, and when the plaster was wet, let me come out so you can come in. When the plaster was wet, you put colours into the plaster in the pattern that you wanted to create. And then it was set and set hard. And we unearthed that. You can see the plaster behind the colours. This is all original. So we've got 2,000 plus years. There's not any more colours in there. They are as you see. Okay, so let's come out, please.
Tapos na.
So again, and you'll probably also notice that once you get inside, it's a lot cooler. Wow. Just keep walking through. And everybody calls him a master builder. But it wasn't Herod that did all this. It was Roman engineering. Keep walking, keep sipping. Always good to be a visual learner. That film was good, wasn't it? Yeah. It gave you a really good basic history of what took place here. Let's come round. Let's remember Psalm 18 verse 1. What was that? This was King David. He said, I love you, O Lord my God. You are my rock,
My refuge,
my
fortress.
Fortress in Hebrew is Masada. Where are we?
Masada.
You got it. Okay. So this is the 7th and most southerly of King Herod's own personal fortresses, if he fell upon bad times. and he deserved to because he was a rotten stinker. If I was to sum him up in a couple of sentences, he was a madman who exacted tons of taxes from his people. He was a half-Jew. He killed every single wise person in Israel, including the rabbinical scholars, if they were any sort of a threat to him. He killed everybody in his family, other than those who outlived him. He was a rotten egg. If you think about it, there have been a few other rotten eggs in the world. The most recent, perhaps, I'll take him back to, who was that chap in Uganda? I can't remember his name.
Amin?
That you got it! Yes. He was not a good guy. I actually think Herod died a pretty nasty death. But there you go. So he died in 4 BC, but he had built this. We know from what we found when the archaeologists came here that the Hasmoneans, who were the Maccabees, remember they got rid of the Greeks in 142, and they actually lived here until they lived in Israel and controlled Israel and returned Judaism to the people of Israel and led people back to the worship of Yahweh, who was the one true God of Israel. They did all that, but in 63 BCE, Pompey and a big legion of Romans came in from the north and took control. So Herod came into his standing as client king for the Romans in 37 BCE. Okay? So here we are. We've come up the little steps. This, we said, was the commandant's residence. When the rebels came here, after Jerusalem had been destroyed, after the rebellion in the Galilee, the Golan, anywhere else in Israel had been quelled, people escaped from Jerusalem. First of all, they went to Qumran, which is up there. This is where the Dead Sea sect, the Essenes, wrote the Dead Sea Scrolls. The Romans came down, they destroyed and killed anybody that escaped, went to En-Gedi. We're going to En-Gedi after this. It's just over there. I'll point it out from the northern place. The Romans followed them, and then they destroyed and killed everybody, and then we were left with Masada. The Americans like to recognize this as the Alamo of Israel, the last stand, as it were. This was the final act of the great revolt that broke out in Caesarea Maritima, the capital of the Roman Empire, for 600 years on the Mediterranean coast. This is the final act of the revolt, which broke out in 66 and finished in Masada in 73 AD, okay, after Christ. So this is a big deal, the story. Now in the story, in the film, they talked about 967 people, something like that. The historian of the time, Josephus, tells us that 2 women and 3 children were found in a cave who actually authenticated Josephus's writings. We scratch our heads with Josephus because a lot of his numbers were not great. He embellished an awful lot. We've got to remember that he was once a Jewish general, and he was defeated and he didn't die with his troops. He actually jumped sides and he helped the Romans. He became their historian. But he would have had a Roman historian looking over his shoulder and sort of saying, put a few more noughts on that one. You know, for example, the 3 great feasts in Jerusalem, he talks about millions. It's impossible that there would have been millions who came to Jerusalem for Pesach, Shavuot and Sukkot. Impossible. 500,000, even that's pretty massive, but that's more like it. So an awful lot of what Josephus writes, we take with what we call a pinch of salt. Where'd you get the salt from? No problem. Yes, no problem. And out of salt, if you use the Latin, you get sal, which is salary. It was actually given to the Roman legions as part of their, you know, what they were issued as Roman soldiers. So salt was a very important thing. Here's that casemate wall, the double wall that went all the way round the mountain around here. Now I mentioned that the Romans destroyed Qumran, where the Dead Sea sect were, and then they escaped and they came to En-Gedi, and then we discovered some scrolls here on Masada. We've actually also found mikvahot. A mikvah is a ritual purification bath for religious people who follow the laws of Leviticus. and that's what the Essenes would have done. They followed the letter of the law, just as the ultra-Orthodox do today, the Pharisees in the time of Jesus. We found some scrolls here. I'm going to take you into that scroll house and have a little bit of a chat when we get round there. But there were Essenes here. Who else was here amongst the 967? There were rebels. There were Sicaria. There were those that had Roman blood on their hands. The zealots. Did somebody say zealots?
Yes, zealots.
Yes.
Yeah, well done. Okay, and there were women and there were children. And guess what else there was here? There were gardens. There were donkeys. There were camels. There were horses. There were sheep. There were goats. This was a thriving place. There was enough water in the cisterns that we've discovered in Masada for 1,000 people for 10 years. Wow. If this place needed to come under siege. I'm going to take you through these part of these storehouses in a minute. If you think about the water for 1,000 years, 10 years for 1,000 people. What did I say? I think I got it wrong. There was enough water here for 10 years for 1,000 people. Yes. Is that what I said? Yes. Okay, keep an eye on me because it's hot. And the brain gets muddled. Okay, storehouses. A whole load of storehouses here. We're going to walk through one in a minute. They would have been full at one time. They would have been enclosed. It would have been cooler in there. Remember, there's a trade route here down the bottom. So they could always bring stuff up to fill up their amphora, their pithoi, their big clay jars. We even found clay jars here with evidence that they had been filled with wine, and the inscription in Latin translates into English, made in Italy. Thank you very much.
Expensive.
Oh, that's the life, eh? So, you know, for the Romans, wherever they were in the empire, they would bring it in. They would bring it in. They probably ate spaghetti. Why not? There's probably a few McDonald's up here. No. As soon as there's a McDonald's up here, I'm stopping guiding. And I wouldn't put it past, you know, it could happen. Please, no. Okay, so storehouse. It's hot out there, so I just want to tell you very briefly. Again, this is another home, a house. There's a frescoed wall with murals. There's a plastered wall with a fresco on it, completely original underneath the black line. You don't have to go in there, but if you want to take a picture, that's fine. It's 3,000 feet from north to south. This is the south, behind me is the north. That's the west, so we're heading towards the Judean hills and falling away into the coastal plain to the Mediterranean, the biblical Great Sea. Behind me is the east. This is the Dead Sea. That was over there, the mountains of the Moabites. Yes. It became under the rule of the Nabateans in the time of Jesus. Okay, the Moabites were not in charge, the Nabateans were. Yes. The Nabateans actually finished their rule in this part of the world in 106 AD, and the Caesar who got rid of them was a guy called Trajan. Now, most of the Caesars from Rome were really not very nice people. They poisoned each other, they killed each other, the Senate killed them. They were a bad lot. And it was all about power, and it was all about family. You know, the history of the Roman Empire, the rise and fall, it's fascinating reading. If you want to get into it, get into it. There's some wonderful videos that you can grab for not very much these days. Actually, most of them come from China. So, there you go, with the big stamp, made in China. All the way from Masada. I love it. Believe it or not, most of the olive wood that's sold in the old city, guess where it comes from? China. Not the Judean mountains. My goodness me. You get very few places in Israel. In Bethlehem, you bet. It's from Israel. No, it's from Israel. They're very proud of the fact that their olive wood is from the Judean mountains and further afield in Israel. One story about when we first came up here with our archaeologists. And remember, that happened in the 50s. They came up here and they found all this stuff, especially in the storehouses. One find was super exciting. They found over 100,000 date pits. You know what a date is?
Yes.
In Hebrew, tamar. Tamar. A lot of our women and girls in Israel are called Tamar, and we shorten that to Tammy. Land of milk and honey. The honey. Well, you know, people say that it's the juice from the date palm, which is one of the 7 species. I don't know. I like bees. I like bee honey, but maybe it was something that came from the date palm. We don't know. But we know that in the desert down there, for 40 years, the children of Israel ate manna, which was provided by God.
Yeah.
We also know that they grumbled and mumbled,
Yeah.
and so he provided a bit of meat.
Yeah.
And we still have quails running around Israel. They're stupid things. They always run in front of cars, trying to show off to their friends. I don't know, or betting with each other who can cross the road before they get squashed. But they're all over where I live up north, quails. But, you know, in Deuteronomy 8, verse 8, the Lord says, "You are when you come into the land of Israel, the promised land, I'm going to give you 7 species to eat. One of those 7 species is a date." And it became an emblem and a symbol of Israel. You've got wheat, barley, dates, figs, grapes, pomegranates. Thank you. Oh, I always forget one. Okay. So those are the. So what did they eat when they came into the land of Israel? They ate from Deuteronomy 8, verse 8. It's good for us to remember that. They ate from Deuteronomy 8, verse 8. And then you've got to be like me and try desperately to remember the 7 species. But a date was one of them. Anyway, when the Romans quelled the revolt, every time they did something like this, they would take captured slaves back to Rome. They would take products from that land back to Rome, and then the big commander of the legionnaires would ride a white horse up the Via Sacra in Rome, and all the adoring crowds would wave and cheer and call them heroes. And this, one of the things they did when they left, when they went and did that thing, they took date palms with them, because every single date palm in the land of Israel was uprooted. And so the date palm, the Judean date palm of old, a symbol of Israel from the Bible, became extinct. Until we found some date pits in Masada. And we put them into a special thing. We tried to germinate, and one germinated. And the scientists got there with their little scratcher, and they put it under a microscope. They took the DNA, they drank a bottle of wine, and they had never come across a date palm like that. Its DNA was different to everything else. It was the Judean date palm. I think it's about 18 years old now, and it's growing on a kibbutz in the south called Kibbutz Ketuva. But it's a male, and dates need a female. You know, a man without a woman is like a ship without a sail. That sort of thing. And this fella, we called him Methuselah. Because he's the oldest germinated seed in the world. So it's a good name for him. And we've taken his pollen. You know, he's very generous every year. He produces a lot of pollen. And we've got all the flowers from the females that are producing good fruit from Morocco, Iran, Iraq, all these countries. And he's producing whopping great juicy dates. But we want to find some pits that are Judean date palms. But it's really good to know that the Judean date palm is not dead. And of course, when a date palm grows, they will send out sort of truncated roots from the bottom. And that's how we propagate them. We wait till they're a bit this high and they're looking good coming out of there, and then we chop them off with roots and we plant them. You know all about that. You do that. We all do that. But that's an interesting story. So I'm going to walk you through the storehouses. We're going to go to the northern end, which is up here. We're going to bypass the Roman bath, but we'll come back to it. We're going to head for here now. This is the three-tiered private palace, private hanging palace for King Herod and his family. Nobody else was allowed there. His servants, yes, the eunuchs, those people that looked after them, but nobody else. So we're going to go up here, and I'll continue talking over there. Okay. Any questions? No. Okay, keep sipping.
It's 1:30.
Grabe yung pawis sa likod ko tumutulo.
Okay, please.
Diretso yan, tip. Ayan, tikasi ko na yan. Joy.
I live in Israel. But I came from New Zealand a long time ago. Very friendly. Very, I'm in Jerusalem. Oh, yeah. You will check it out.
Wow.
Doesn't tell you much more than what I've told you already. So at the northern end, we're at the northern end of Masada. And this is an end where it's and he was using his engineers. He was thinking when he built himself this personal palace. Because, you know, Masada can be so hot. It's nearly always throughout the summer over 100 degrees. It's over 40 degrees Celsius. Last week, before you came here, we had 49 degrees.
Wow. Oh my goodness.
On Masada. This place doesn't get any rain, it just gets very hot. But what you do get at the northern end is a little breeze. And I want you to come and stand over here on this platform and look north. And I want you to take your hats off and feel the breeze.
Take your hats off. Para mahanginan yung ulo.
Feel the breeze? There you are. Look at that, I just turned the fan on.
You just turned the AC on.
Oh, I just turned the AC on.
Yeah, I turned the AC on.
Isn't that cool?
It's the AC.
Wow. So nice.
Okay, after this we're going to have a Roman bath. And because we're Romans, it's not separate. Men and women together. Sorry about that. Okay, now let me keep talking because we've still got things to do, and I know you want to cover yourselves in mud for some strange reason later today. That's cool. So here we are. We're facing north.
Yeah.
Jerusalem is over there. It's, you know, as the crow flies, 40 miles. Through that gap is Bethlehem. Again, 35 miles. Over the hills in the western direction, maybe 25 miles, is Hebron. We were there.
Yeah.
Okay, and everything up there gets a lot of rain. No rain here though. All the rain is dumped on the Judean mountains, and then it comes over here, it drops, the clouds drop, there's no moisture in the clouds. But let's take ourselves back to 72, 73 AD. Jerusalem has fallen. The second temple has been destroyed. Thousands of people have been slaughtered and murdered. Those that escaped went to Qumran. And guess who came down chasing them? It was the 10th Legion, led by Titus, who was Vespasian's son. Vespasian later went on to become a Caesar, become the ruler of the Roman Empire. But Titus, he made sure that he was the last man to actually get rid of the rebellion and to stamp it out. How many people in a legion? The maximum number of Romans in a legion is 6,000 people. If every single soldier has an auxiliary, which is a helper, you've got 12,000 people. And this was actually joined by half of a legion from Syria, which is to the north of Israel, the northeast. So you have an enormous number of Romans coming. They did Qumran. They killed everybody in Qumran. Those that escaped came to En-Gedi. En-Gedi is there. You can see that black patch there. That's part of En-Gedi, and the reason that they're actually trees, and it's because of the water from the spring. David's Wadi. We're going there after this. But then they came this way, and just imagine that amount of people, maybe 15 to 20,000, coming this way with their wagons and everything else that they needed. There would have been a dust storm coming. And for the people on this mountain, whoa, it was showtime. It was going to happen. And whenever the Romans came and besieged anywhere, they built a wall round what they were besieging. And if you look down here, you can actually see the remnants of the wall that Hollywood built. Because Hollywood made a movie called Masada. And that area there that you see, that sort of square, they believe that that was Flavius de Silva. That was his camp. He was the head of the Roman command. There were 8 major camps positioned around Masada. There was a wall down there. There were catapults. There were things being thrown up.